Now we can officially begin. My name is Michael Mercurio. I am Executive Director of Cambridge Common Writers, which is an alumni organization for alumni and faculty of the Lesley University Low Residency MFA program in creative writing. And in my role at CCW, it is my incredible pleasure to welcome you here this evening, to thank you for being here, because you are going to hear tremendous dynamic stories from Jody Hobbs Hesler and brilliant conversation between Jody and Pam Petro, who is one of our beloved faculty members at Lesley. So before I hand things over to them, I am just going to read you their bios very quickly. Jody Hobbs Hesler has written ever since she could hold a pencil, and she now lives and writes in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Growing up, she split time between suburban Richmond, Virginia, and the mountains outside Winchester, Virginia. Her experience in these regions flavors her writing. She is the author of the story collection, What Makes You Think You're Supposed to Feel Better, which she'll be reading from tonight. That is just out from Cornerstone Press. And her debut novel, Without You Here, is forthcoming from Flexible Press in November of 2024. So mark your calendars for 1 year from now. You have a little bit of time to pre-order the book, but make sure that you're ready for it in November of 2024. Jody teaches at Writer House in Charlottesville, Virginia. She reads for the Los Angeles Review and writes and edits for Charlottesville Family and Virginia Wine and Country Life magazines. She is an accomplished writer who has published across a variety of disciplines. Her writing has appeared in the Westchester Review, Gargoyle, Pithead Chapel, the Los Angeles Review, Necessary Fiction, the Bangalore Review, Arts and Letters, Valparaiso Fiction Review, the Raleigh Review, the Rumpus, Craft, the Millions, Heavy Feather Review, and elsewhere. Jody, hi, welcome. I'm so excited to hear you read tonight. Pam Petro is an author, artist, and educator living in Northampton, Massachusetts with her partner Marguerite and their Pembroke Welsh Corgi, Topaz. Pam has written 4 books of creative nonfiction, including her latest, The Long Field, Wales and the Presence of, as well as Travels in an Old Tongue, which is also about Wales, Sitting Up with the Dead, about the American South, and The Slow Breath of Stone, about Southwest France. Her articles and essays have appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Sunday Telegraph, The Atlantic, Granta, Guernica, The Paris Review, and elsewhere. The Long Field was shortlisted for the Wales Book of the Year Award and was named a top 10 travel book of the year by the Financial Times and the Sunday Telegraph. Pam teaches creative writing at Smith College here in Northampton and on Lesley University's MFA in Creative Writing program. Pam is also co-director of the Dylan Thomas Summer School at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David's, where she is also a fellow. She has widely exhibited her photography and has also created an artist book called After Shadows, a Grand Canyon narrative, and a graphic script called Under Paradise Valley. And just one little thing about The Long Field from Gillian Clark, who's Wales' longest serving national poet. Not since Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek have I felt so involved as a reader in finding out what it all means. This is a beautifully written, unput-downable book about language, love, and being alive, here, now. And here and now, you have the great fortune of hearing Jody read and these 2 brilliant minds converse about Jody's work and writing in general. So sit back, relax, enjoy yourselves, because I'm about to turn things over to our brilliant, brilliant stars.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. That was lovely.
That was just beautiful. I appreciate it so much. And welcome, everybody. This is Jody's reading, but I am her host, one of her second host here tonight. And she's going to read from 5 of her stories, some short excerpts, and then I'm going to throw a couple questions at her after she does each one. And then we're going to open it up to questions from everybody. But I just want to say before I get started, what a pleasure it has been and how lucky I am to work with Jody, because I am in nonfiction and Jody was a fiction student. And somehow, through sheer good luck, I got to read her, to be her thesis reader. And uh, her thesis just was one of those memorable books. So it was already a book that becomes part of your memory and becomes part of your life. And I've never forgotten the stories I read. When did you graduate?
2017.
Wow, that's amazing. So 6 years ago, those stories are still fresh, which I can't say a lot about a lot of other things. And then Jody went to Wales too, and that really cemented our friendship and our mutual admiration, I think. I'm going to read really fast the blurb I wrote for Jody's book because I thought about this a lot, and I think it sums up how I feel about what makes you think you're supposed to feel better. Jody Hobbs Hesler is the writer who reminded me why I love short stories. Whether writing about a young mother-to-be and the fortune teller next door, or a man who buys a giant M&M advertisement for his grown daughter, or a woman's fascination with her dead neighbor's house, Hobbs Hesler unerringly finds the spaces between people, or in between the self and its desires, and probes those places, often with great subtlety and restraint, occasionally with gleeful absurdity and wit. Her characters are fundamentally decent people trying to do better in a world that constrains them through place and circumstance. Not all of them, but most of them. Their struggles reveal their natural compassion and sensitivity, and surging through now and again like a consuming flame, the primal needs of the self. This is a collection to be treasured, returned to, and remembered as a source of revelation. And I think that sums up what it meant to me. But now we want to open it up and unpack it for you guys. So Jody is going to read some from the first story in the collection, and one of my favorite short stories ever, called Alone. Jody.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Pam. Those were I can't describe how wonderful it is to hear those things. And Michael, the same. And thank you for having me here. And thank you all for being here. I have to give you just a little bit of setup before I read this little section from the first story, which is called Alone. We are with our main character. She is a medical illustrator and an at-home parent. She is on a deadline for this particular illustration. So her husband has come home early and is out jogging with the baby, and their other child is at school. Okay, so that's part of that you need to know. You also know she has a neighbor friend named Nola, who also has a pet goat, Mr. Biscuit. He features in this little snippet. And then you need to know that across the street, there was a neighbor who recently died, and his body went undiscovered for a long time, and there was a terrible smell. And a professional cleaning company had to come and take care of that. So now we join our main character, distracted from her work by a smell, and right now she has snuck into the house across the street and is looking through the dead man's window toward her own house. I think one thing that I should probably mention is some of these stories are a little disturbing. So, okay. The paper said they found Bean sitting in a chair, so surely the cleaners heaved that one into the dump. From the lounge chair they left behind, you could see straight across to my house. I reclined, flicked the handle to pop the footrest up. If people were inside our house, you wouldn't see much detail, but you could watch them like TV. You would know when they were there, moving around, speaking to each other. You would know when they laughed, when they shouted, when they cried. The chair was comfortable. I felt my arms sink into the armrests, my legs into the seat. The corduroy and faded taupe had softened from years of use, with patches at the ends of the armrests where the cord had all but worn away. I watched from the chair when Nola bounded up my porch steps and knocked at my screen door. I hadn't planned to be gone long, so I had left the front door swung wide. Mr. Biscuit bobbed onto the porch, and Nola screeched the screen door open. From Bean's chair, I could hear her call for me. She stepped inside. When Mr. Biscuit butted the screen door, I could hear the soft rap of his head. Nola came back outside, pulled the front door closed behind her, and looked in every direction, but not toward Bean's house. Later, Will trotted back into the yard with a jogging stroller. He unloaded a sleepy Lynn and disappeared inside with her. Soon he reemerged from the front door and stood on the porch calling my name. Must be time for the bus. Lynn would want to nurse soon. That pulmonary valve sat unfinished on my desk. I must have been sitting in Bean's house, in Bean's chair, in the soft bug of that awful smell for over an hour. But it didn't feel awful. It didn't feel awful when I saw Will lean his head out our front door again. He turned every direction except toward Bean's house, looking and calling my name. It didn't feel awful when I watched him leave for the bus stop with Lynn strapped to his chest, or when he returned holding Ella's hand. I could tell from the way Ella's head moved. She was talking and excited, but I couldn't hear what she said. Will was louder, saying things like, "Oh, really?" Even from the muted sound of his voice, I could tell he was worried. That didn't feel awful either. It should have, but it didn't. I got hungry. I had to use the bathroom. My breasts ached with milk. By now, Will must have given Lynn a bottle. But I didn't move from the chair. I watched a few leaves spiral from trees in the wind, listened to the thunk of acorns on Bean's roof, the scrabble of squirrel claws, the clatter of the train. Birds swooped and chirped outside. Will wouldn't understand.
Ooh. This is the most curious story. It's Poe, Edgar Allan Poe has a wonderful quote in which he says, when you do something that you know is a danger to you or others, or makes you or others uncomfortable, and yet you do it anyway, you're under the influence of the imp of the perverse. And I feel like that has a bearing here. Why did you decide to begin the collection with this story?
So this story to me embodies something that most of the stories embody, which we touched on, in the opening, where everyone's a little bit of lonely, a little bit of yearning. This main character, Pearl, she's surrounded by people, but she's lonely in a crowd. So to me, it embodied all of the themes in the collection, but it also kind of hits with a punch. It's disturbing. So you're paying attention. So you open the book and you start with a story that's going to make you pay attention. So I've thought a lot over the course of putting this book together about how you put short stories together, and it's a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of luck, and a little bit of really concentrating on how they go together and how to keep a reader intrigued. So,
well, you certainly keep a reader intrigued. My goodness. It's like you find that point, like when you whack your elbow or something, and you get that shivery feeling. It's like this is an extended shiver, and that really, but in a good way, and it invites you in. It's just such a strong story to start with. So now, continuing this theme of both loneliness and things are not the way people think they are. I'd like you to read something from the story Harmony. The main characters in Harmony are in denial, and that makes them exasperating, but that makes them, to me, also a little heartbreaking. So tell us a little bit about that, and before you read.
Well, to set up the reading, or do you want to ask more?
No, just to set it up.
No problem. So we are at a little French bistro. So it's Harmony spelled with an IE, en français. And we are with Vanessa and Martin. This is their favorite restaurant, and they're waiting for their adult daughter to join them. She's in town for the week, but she's not staying with them. This is the first time she's ever done such a thing, and Vanessa is taking it hard, and maybe sort of misplacing her sense of affection in this scene. I think that sums it up.
Perfect.
Henry brought a basket of bread and butter, refilled their water, said nothing. He's so attuned to us, Vanessa said, once he was out of earshot. He's a good sort. How many times do you think we've had another waiter since he started working here, Martin? Twice, maybe? Martin mentioned a clumsy waiter they had once. Remember when she dropped your butter knife into your lap? He laughed. We never saw her after that. Really, though, haven't we had Henry every other time? I bet he asks for us when he sees our reservations. Might be, Martin said. He's like the son we never had. Sometimes alcohol affected her very quickly, spreading a warmth inside that radiated into her emotions. Not really like a son. Martin looked into his lap and adjusted his napkin there. We don't really know him. But we do. Vanessa reached across the table for Martin's wrist for emphasis and bumped the candle, splashing wax onto the tablecloth. We probably see him more often than anyone else we know, and he's always happy to see us. We tip well, dear. Don't be such a cynic. She rested against her seat back and took a large sip of her drink. The ice clanked when she thumped her glass down onto the table, harder than she'd meant. When Martin looked up at her, she expected a corrective expression. Instead, his eyes trained on her with gentle concern. Vanessa fumbled in her purse for lipstick, applied a fresh layer, puckered against a stray tissue, keeping her hands and gaze occupied. They had planned to have more children, but planning isn't everything. She nearly bled to death when Julia was born, and the doctor had insisted on a tubal ligation. Their cocktails were all but drained when the door shimmered open. The reflection of the restaurant's soft light quavered with the motion of the glass, and a burst of wind rattled the silver and glassware at the few empty tables as Julia stepped inside. Martin hopped right up and strode toward her. People nearby scooted their chairs out of his way.
Ooh. These selections that you're reading are so inviting. I think they're really enticing. The perfect tips of icebergs. So here, a question. This seems poised between, like I said, both perhaps denial and a little bit of heartbreak, and a little bit of comedy, and also impending, not tragedy, but disappointment. I think you're pushing the characters out of their comfort zones, and perhaps because the reader can identify so well with these characters, the reader out of his or her comfort zone. What do you think about that? Is that something you're trying to do here?
So I think that what literature can do is really make us feel something someone else feels. So when we do that, we're liable to become uncomfortable. When we can really venture into somebody's conflict, into somebody's complication. But I think that's where connection comes from. And I think we're in a really disconnected world, particularly right now. And anytime we can invite connection, I think that's, what we should do. And so I think a good story should should connect us with something bigger than ourselves. So yeah, sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable.
Well, that's exactly what I think the best stories do. They make us feel empathy. How I'm going to ask you on a craft level now, how do you do that? How do you create that empathy for these characters here?
I think the one big important part is that I have empathy for them. So I can see their comic potential, but I see them as human people first. So trying to make sure that I don't get lost in the caricature of a moment, because the caricature can get larger and larger, particularly in the story. So to make sure I don't get lost in the caricature and keep grounding us, we have this moment where she's said this thing about, oh, he's like our son. But then when she's turning away, we learn that she hasn't been able to have other children. That wasn't their choice. This loneliness that she's having that she's experiencing has been sort of imposed upon her. So I think that in one moment that we want to laugh at her, in the next moment we want to kind of take her in the other room and hug her, and like that's the goal. So trying to balance out how I'm handling the details so that I don't stay distant from her in that kind of like I don't want to be too objective. I also don't want to be, by the same token, though, you don't want to spend too much time in the like making it melodramatic, and you kind of just taking too much time to give too much humanity, if that's possible.
We don't need too much backstory, but that's a really wonderful answer. And I think I would add too, that balance studded with little details, like she applies her lipstick. That's one of those moments that women take to reset and to give yourself a bit of privacy in the midst of a public place. And I felt for her when she did that. And I thought, you were such a smart author to have her do that there. Okay, so let's go broader now. So this next story, The Secret Life of Otto and Hilda, which is one of the ones I cannot forget, pushes lonely and funny a little further. Hilda is a life-size M&M character that Otto buys at a convenience store, and he carts it around. And what happens next is very similar to what you just talked about. We have the broad scenario, but into which you introduce poignancy. So could you tell us a little bit about this and do some and read a little bit?
So we're picking up with Otto here after he's had Hilda, the life-size M&M, kind of riding shotgun with him for a couple of days. The day before, he had tried to give this as a gift to his college-age daughter out of a misguided idea that this was somehow going to heal some wounds between them. Unsurprisingly to everyone but Otto, this backfired. So we join him now going back into his car, and he's getting kind of tired of this routine. Back in his parking garage once more, Otto debated Hilda's fate. It's been a lovely go of it, he told her, but ultimately it hasn't worked out. Her smirk was starting to unnerve him, and the Christmas hat wasn't funny anymore. He wanted to blame her for disappointing his daughter yesterday and for his growing unease about seeing her again today. There was no one to contradict him. Parking spaces were not large. Removing Hilda without whacking his car door against the Porsche beside it proved difficult, and Otto wasn't entirely certain the doors hadn't bumped one another. In the dimness, he couldn't tell for sure if there was a smudge of metallic gray in the center of the cobalt blue sports car's door. Hilda struggled, but not as much as she had coming down Marta's stairs. Otto liked to think she'd learned something in their 2 days together. He lugged her over to the dumpsters. The scraping of her plastic boots along the pavement echoed in the tight space of the garage. It was one of those irritating sounds that prickled Otto's spine. If he had any skill at physics, he was sure he could deduce the best way to lever Hilda up and into the garbage. Not only did Otto lack such skill, he also lacked time. He had a few emails to return and a couple of grooming tasks to complete before meeting his daughter for lunch, so he stood with Hilda beside the dumpster to think. She leaned into him so that someone from behind might mistake her for some kind of companion. At this thought, Otto shot a conspiratorial glance Hilda's way, and her painted sneer seemed to share his joke again. Throwing her away seemed cruel now. Why not just leave her here? Set her up beside the dumpster like people did with furniture they meant to give away? Marta hadn't wanted her, but maybe someone else would. Otto bobbled her to and fro until her white boots found their balance. There's hope for you yet, Hilda, Otto said, and he touched a fist gently to her cheek.
That's fantastic. I love it. Okay, so I've been meaning to ask you this question for a long time. How did you get the idea for this story?
Well, there is a good story behind this story. So, and I can say this because none of you are from town. So in Charlottesville, there is a personality about town. He's a wealthy businessman. He also happens to be, like Otto is, from Germany. And you'll see him around town. He's got this kind of foofy white hair and always these rumpled linen suits that I'm sure were handmade. So he's a very distinctive looking character. When you see him in passing, you know it's him you're seeing. And he owns the building that my husband's company is in. So my husband was at work one day and happened to see him come in that day. So when he was driving home and glimpsed him out of the corner of his eye, he recognized him right away. And it was a pretty big double take when he noticed that he was wrestling a life-sized M&M into the seat of his car. So he comes home telling me this, and just he's cracking up laughing, just telling me. We're all cracking up laughing, trying to picture it. And it really made me think, like, what on earth is he doing with this thing? Like, why would did he buy it? I mean, it was at a convenience store. So did he go in there, and who sells this? Who has the authority to sell this? Like, so part of that part isn't the part I read from, but part of the story kind of wrestles with wealth disparity, and sort of the idea of privilege, and who gets to be in charge of an interaction like that, and what people have to lose and gain from it. That's kind of very much a subtext and not the main target of the story. But to me, that was a big part of the question. It seemed like such a strange thing. And probably the answer is really boring. Probably he owned the building that was in, and he was just taking the life-sized M&M from one building to the other convenience store that he owned, or into storage for next season or whatever. So it was probably a pretty boring answer.
But you made it far from boring. I just love it. Hey, tell me this too. So the end of this story ends on a hopeful arc upward, I think. Did you plan for that, or did or did Otto in some way push you toward it? Did he create his own hope for this?
Or was it Hilda? But
or was it Hilda? Yes.
But that it's a good question, and I do think that I tend to be a hopeful person, and I think that has something to do with the way I look at literature. But this all comes back to, like, the idea of balance in a story, and there is a story shape. This is one of my craft talk was on narrative tension, and I looked at a bunch of different plot shapes, and one of them, which I never can quite relate to, is where something starts off terrible and then it just gets worse, and the whole plot structure goes from really bad to just terrible. I have a hard time, like, finding purchase in a plot shape where there's no hope at all. Like, even if it's just a glimpse of it and it's dashed again, the idea that there was hope once actually introduces the possibility that after the story ends, it could come back. So to me, there's a place for hope. And I also feel like it's this chemical equation thing with a story where there's got to be a balance of emotions. So I like for there to be the possibility for up.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the elements of this story are tantalizing. They beg for hope in a sense, and they do it on our behalf, because I think readers are also always looking for hope, even in a darker story, say, which is actually a segue perhaps to the next story. Okay, so it was just Halloween, and this is a scary story. It's not the kind of scare for fun story. It's a scary story, especially for anyone who's a parent or in charge of a child. Tell us about this one and what you're going to read.
This is
Grown Up Party.
This isn't the last reading excerpt, but this is the last story in the section, which is called Grown Up Party. And we are with Dana, who her father has custody for the weekend. So he has taken Dana and her brother Alec to a party for grown-ups. She's really not happy about that. She had to leave playing with her friend, and he wouldn't let her bring her library books or anything with her. So she's sort of stuck being bored. This story gets even more dangerous than the scene we're about to read. This is sort of the setup for yet more, but here we go. People spill out of the house and onto the patch of grass out front, talking, smoking, holding drinks. Dana slips outside with them. Rows of ferns line the front of the house. June bugs dive bomb Dana from the bushes that frame the porch. Gnats blink against her face. The man with the disco shirt still leans against the car across the street, smoking a cigarette and facing away from the house. That's where Dana would like to go, away from the house. She kicks along the sidewalk. A line of ants marches through a crack in the cement. They're carrying bits of something. When she looks back toward the front of the house again, she sees her father, outside now too, sitting on the lawn beyond the porch. The woman in the green jumpsuit lies in the grass, her head in his lap. They say something to each other in voices she can't hear. Then her father calls, "Dana, come here." He's still taller than she is when he's sitting down. "How old are you?" he says, the way parents of little kids ask them what a cow says. 8. Flo here wants to know if you've ever lit a match. Flo pokes his thigh. It's a joke again. "I'm not allowed." "You're allowed here." He jostles in his pockets, bouncing Flo's head about in his lap, making her laugh her terrible shriek over and over. He fishes out a matchbook. "Here, try it." "I don't want to." "Aw, don't be scared," Flo says. "Mom says not to." "I keep telling you," her father says, "you don't have to do what she says when you're with me." Dana thinks about her library books. She'd rather do what her mother says. "Anyway, I don't want to raise you up to be a scaredy cat like her." The woman and her father smile big, goopy smiles that have nothing to do with her. She wants them to leave her alone. "Go ahead." Her father presses the book into her hand. "I bet you can't." He says it like a dare.
This story makes me so angry. I get so angry at this father. And I'll just say, without giving the story away, that the father's reckless behavior and daring of his daughter and inattention put her in real danger toward the end of the piece. I have a longer question, but I just was struck from what you read. How did the line of ants come to you? That you include these are the things you're describing in front of the house? Where did that come from?
You know, to me, that it's sort of a visceral, like Virginia summer detail. There's always just lines of ants. So what's funny when you ask that is I'm picturing the front of my, not this scenario where we are here, but like my real house, the front porch. I'm looking at my mom where we lived in Newburytown and just watching ants go along this one particular crack. So it's just a visceral, tactile summer detail, like the June bugs.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
perfect. It's perfect because it does say summer. It says of this place, of very closely seen. Setting so that the setting becomes more than just a backdrop. It's really it's holding these characters in this particular place and letting them interact in particular ways. Okay, so my question, this story suggests to me that we're all perhaps just one step away from disaster, especially disasters that could be avoided if we paid closer attention, especially as parents. Did this piece start from an incident, or is this a point you wanted to make that you found a scenario to play out, to play that point out?
So it's interesting because there's always something in a story that I've taken a lens to from real life. So, like in the rest of the story, it becomes clear this is in the 1970s because of the music that's being,
Right.
some of the behaviors that are kind of outdated now. So that was my childhood, was in the 70s. And one of the things I was kind of getting at with it is the music, which was everywhere, like the radio was everywhere. The music is just steeped in just sexuality. So it's just everything just sort of oozes sexuality in every direction. It's not hard to then take that up a notch and have that somehow interact with children inappropriately. I don't want to get into too much but the territory that the story covers, but there's lots of different dangers represented. It's also true that when I was a kid, I remember this one particular summer trip that I took with my dad and my brother and my stepbrother. And probably, I guess my stepsister was there too. But I remember we were going to like a pizza restaurant or something. We were playing the original Atari. It was that long ago. And there were posters up on like telephone poles about a little boy my age who'd gone missing. And I feel like it must have been on the radio as well. Like he'd been walking between like his grandmother's house and his friend's house, like two houses apart, and he was gone. And so this intersected with my summer visit to a beach area. So like I think it was probably my first awareness of how much danger kids could be in. And so mixing that all up with a lot of the other things about the age seemed like a direction that was kind of rich for possibility.
It's fascinating to see all the elements that go into this piece or into any piece, but that you're pulling from memory, you're pulling from the elements of a time of the 70s that contributed, and that one particular, that poster, create something new out of all of those elements that are familiar to you, that, and perhaps new and surprising as well to you. Before we get to the last piece you're going to read, I just, one more question. So we've seen that you started this collection with Alone, and it closes with this piece, Grown Up Party. Why did you bookend? Why did you choose? You talked about learning to create that arc in a collection. How are these pieces important markers at the beginning and the end?
Interesting, because I thought of all of the different things, but I hadn't thought of the bookend effect exactly. But both of these stories, I feel like, do embody this in very different ways, the way people can feel alone. and they both pack a punch. So, I wanted the last line in the collection to be like, you have to look at it to get it right. But there was something about the last line being leaving her behind in the dirt that, it kind of is like a gut punch right at the end. So, so sorry, but that was
You give nothing away with that.
on purpose, it was meant to again, the first story is really trying to get your attention, and I didn't want the last story to end softly. I wanted it to keep the attention to the end.
You do. You keep that crescendo up, but you talked earlier about hope, and this certainly provides hope, even if it's hope that comes from serendipity. I think in this case, I mean, serendipity can be our friend.
Yeah,
As it is here. So both, I think you give us hope, and you also give us that rush, and both of those things go not always hand in hand, but they do in this piece, and perhaps that's why it's so memorable to me. Okay, so this last reading, from a craft perspective, these stories are very different. The narrator bears a lot of weight in some of them. The characters and in others, especially this one, the characters bear the weight of narrative in that there's a lot more dialogue. And we learn what's happening as characters speak to each other. And that's a spectrum. And the stories fall in between. But this is perhaps the most talky of the pieces. So these characters in Things Are Already Better Someplace Else, which is the name of the story, are very, they're strong-willed. They have strong idiosyncratic voices. I think it'll be a treat for all of us to hear you speak their voices, you, their creator. So tell us a little bit about this one before you read too.
This one requires no setup because we're reading from the beginning. So
okay,
we can, any questions afterwards are welcome, but you get to know what everyone knows approaching this story.
Super.
So Things Are Already Better Someplace Else. All you did was use the toilet, then clear away the blocks Beverly had left scattered in the entryway. You didn't want anyone to trip later coming inside. You left her with her sidewalk chalk out in front of the duplex, singing one of her wordless songs. Silence was your first clue, even before you recognized the car swerving off down the road. Your Beverly is a smudge of a child, a shadow of herself, but powdery pale, so she catches what light there is and shimmers in it. When her daddy pulled up to the curb, she must have figured he wouldn't see her. When was Mickey ever looking for her? She's his own child, but you have to force him to watch her nights you work late. Daytimes, there's the cheap daycare down the road, but his mama's your only other choice for nights, and she won't say yes unless you ask him first. At least she lives close to him. One of the million reasons your marriage didn't last past squat, but for Beverly, she gives a damn, and she's never drunk or dangerous like Mickey. She might return Beverly to you reeking of soap she bought from some fancy store in the mall. That smug smile saying she judged you never bathed her on your own. Because you use unscented soap, the only kind that doesn't pock her skin into hives. Whenever old witchy Wilma drops Beverly back off, you have to plop her in a warm water bath first thing to soak those perfumey soaps off her, stop the hives before they pop. At least she doesn't ignore the child the way Mickey does. Sometimes Beverly eats dry cereal for supper by herself at his place. When her daddy finally rolls in from a friend's house 2 doors down or the bar across the street, she pretends to be asleep instead of hungry, since half the time he cooks for her, he forgets, walks away from the pan until something catches fire. You've told her, just go down to Granny Wilma's if he's not there to feed you dinner, or if he walks off with a pan on the stove. But Beverly shakes her tiny little head with the wisdom of a ghost and lets you wonder why. If you had anywhere else to send her, you would. You wish you could send her straight to Wilma, even though she seethes when you call her on the phone. You have to call her now, though, because that was Mickey's car squealing away from the curb, and now Beverly's nowhere to be found. Every last stalk of sidewalk chalk lies tiddlywinks by the curb. Her half-empty juice box sits by the pile, waiting as much as you for the child to slink back into view. Wilma says into the phone she hasn't seen Mickey since yesterday, and her voice has the crisp sound of something about to break. She knows you wouldn't call after him in all your life if not for Beverly, knows he doesn't pay support and you don't have enough food, knows he doesn't do you a single bit of good. Out of some warped brand of loyalty, she still blames you for starting the fights, before and after you left. You've seen her fill a doorway to stop him from barreling through it, though, to stop him from barreling smack into you. Sure, she spits your name like a thing caught in her teeth, thinks you grew out of a mud pit with manners you'd expect of a pig. Well, fuck her, but thank God for her too.
Wow. All right, I have to just call attention to your language. Your language, Missy. This one. No, what I mean is, we haven't really talked about how well you use language in this book and how startling it is. Just a couple phrases to pull out here. Your Beverly is a smudge of a child. A smudge. That's just an inspired phrase. It tells us so much about her. Did that come to you in a flash, or was that hard fought, hard won?
That one came. So this story came. I mean, like I worked on all of them, so nothing just kind of falls out and it's there. But a lot about this story came in a rush.
Wow.
During lockdown, when my older, but both my kids were home for 4 months during lockdown. One was finishing college, one was working in the job that she had was answering calls for a legal clinic attached to a domestic violence shelter in Baltimore. And she was doing it remotely, obviously, but she had to do at least 10 intakes a week where she asked a series of extremely specific questions about the kind of abuse that the women had experienced, and mostly women, not entirely. And the whole point was to establish what's called a lethality score, which is like how likely that person is to be killed imminently. So that was her reality as we were on lockdown. So there was just this whole sort of pressurized atmosphere kind of surrounding all of us in a way. And in the middle of that, because that was a relatively new job for her too, so she was getting used to the job, and it happened to be that job, and it was lockdown. And then there was an Amber Alert. And it just kind of hit me really hard. So it was still at the beginning before we realized how awfully tragic lockdown was for people in relationships like that, how few resources and outlets they had, just that whole pressurized system. But that it just sort of exploded into that story for me.
Wow. Well, that kind of that pressure cooker situation that you describe, sometimes I think I tell students it's a matter of pressure to find the language that carries that emotion. And I say, press on it, and you'll find it. And I think that situation helped draw out phrases like, her voice has the crisp sound of something about to break. That really stuck with me. And I know what you mean. I know what you mean by that. So going to the emotion driving this, the situational emotion, this is a piece about a lot of things. It's about, again, a child in danger, but it's also about the conflict that we all have in close relationships that are push me, pull you, those love-hate human relationships. And we all have people we feel this way about. And you say, well, fuck her, but thank God for her too. Do you see that conflict as the white hot core of this story, and everything else around it is detail? Or is it, does the story have a greater arc that has more to do with Beverly?
I feel like the part of the story belongs to it's a second person story. You and she's never named in the story, but I feel like it's really about her. It's about how all of them are kind of bare knuckling it through a really tough life. Wilma didn't catch any breaks. Nothing was easy for her. We find her off-putting, but the more we learn about her backstory, the more we understand how she's shaped the way she is, and that these two people are kind of stuck relying on each other. And to me, there's some real tenderness that develops in that, and it's maybe that connection that the story revolves around for me.
And you have them sit down on the stoop next to each other, and that's the image I take away. And it's that tenderness within that kind of bare knuckle life that they're leading that stuck with me. And that's one of the things that inspired the blurb that I wrote for the book, those spaces between people in which we pour our tenderness and hope and find it as well. So this all embodies that. So now we can open this up to questions from the audience. I'm just going to kick off with one last one. Please tell us about the title. I've been waiting to ask this question. This wonderful title, what makes you think you're supposed to feel better?
That's a line of dialogue from the story Sorry Enough, in which this character Buckley has injured a woman in a hit and run accident, and he spent a year in jail, and he's come back to her house pretending like he's somebody else so he can make sort of anonymous amends to her. And I don't want to give any spoilers away, but in the process, he kind of unwittingly wants her to make him feel better, or to summarize quite a lot of stuff that goes on in that story. And there's a moment at which he says something like, oh, is that supposed to make me feel better? And she says, what makes you think you're supposed to feel better? Which means you did a crappy thing, dude, and it takes a while. You can't rush it. You can't just skip over the process of getting to feel better. And to me, I feel like that speaks to a lot of just sort of cultural truth. I think we're really bad in this country, and I'm not sure which countries do it well, but we're bad in this country at allowing ourselves to have some time where we're just not happy, where we're between the high points. And all these characters are between high points. And we can waste a lot of time. We can waste a lot of emotional energy wishing that part was over, and then we miss the growth that's there, that's possible. I say this, and I mean, like, I do this all the time. So just, just knowing about it doesn't cure me of this compulsion or whatever. But what makes you think you're supposed to feel better is just a reminder that sometimes it hurts, and it's okay to have to hurt for a little while. It's not a flaw in our character to have to experience a difficult emotion.
I think you can know that and understand and employ that wisdom as a writer, but as a human, nobody wants to be in that in-between place. But those in-between places, it all comes back to hiraeth. And those are the creative places. And that's where you as a writer, I think, have found your such great wisdom, richness, empathy, and also some really inspired zaniness too, which I love. I love that's here. So let's have some questions from this wonderful audience.
if anyone does have a question, feel free to unmute and just hop on in. Or if you can't shake being polite, use the raised hand function in Zoom, or raise your hand and I'll call on you. And while we're waiting for folks to think of their questions, I do want to just say, I said this to Pam and to Jody before the reading started, but one of the things that I was so taken with about this collection of short stories was just how perfect every detail was. And there wasn't too much detail. It didn't feel like Jody was trying to cram the whole world into each story. We were getting slices of very real, very vivid worlds. And I compared it to those old, you know, the earth where a slice is taken out and it's got the label of the mantle and the crust and all of the other layers that I forget because I don't remember geology. But Jody really does that so beautifully with these stories. And yeah, they're just gorgeous and chilling and weird in exactly the way that life is.
Yes. Yes. And I think that you all have had a real taste tonight of the range of work, the tonal range as well as the subject range and the different voices, and just the different material here, you know, from the giant M&M to the couple having dinner, and woman sitting in her dead neighbor's house. I mean, all this stuff bombards us every day, and it goes past most people. But you put it's like your catcher's mitt on, and World Series. I've been watching the World Series, and caught some of these things, and made these cross sections of them, and that's pretty extraordinary. So, oh, good question.
Hi, Jody. First of all, congratulations with this short story collection. I'm so excited and I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm curious, so when you're arranging a collection of your stories, I imagine there are the themes that you plan for, and then there are themes that also surprise you once you put everything together. So I'm curious, what were some of the themes that surprised you when you were sort of arranging the book?
What a great question. Just want to say.
That's a really good question. And I have to say that, you know, there's so many stages in the preparing book. So like first writing the stories to begin with, and they you know, many of them were published different places. So different editors had their hands on it at different times. So I've steeped myself in every story 1,000 times. Then I'm putting them together as one thing. And then I'm changing them all around. I maybe have to change somebody's name because it's too much like somebody else's name. So this heightened level of detail and all this other stuff. So I've read through them independently. I've read through them in a row. And then we come to the galleys and, you know, like the last thing before it's all done. And I'm like, these people cut a lot. Like, this is the thing that surprised me. Like, I didn't realize what potty mouths my characters had. And that was really funny to me. So, I mean, that wasn't exactly a theme, but that was the first thing I thought of when you asked that question. There's also, you know, there's a lot of things that I think the thing that surprised me is something that I noticed sort of obliquely, but when it hit the whole collection, there's a lot of miscarriage. There's a lot of like loss in like parenting situations, you know, like these long griefs, and those were really interesting to me. We go from there's an abortion in one, there's a stillbirth in one, and there's miscarriages in a couple of them. It's a lot. And then there's children. I mean, like there's just a lot. That part was probably a theme I hadn't really realized was there right away.
I hadn't realized that when I read your thesis, how much it focused on children, and the precariousness of childhood, in a sense. And that was very clear to me when I read it again this time. And that might have been something you strengthened. I don't know. But I have a question for you, too. Did you always intend the collection to be as long as it is? Was that your choice? Was that a publisher's choice? Were there stories that were left out that you wanted to include, or how did that work?
I shopped this collection around in a couple of different situations, in a couple of different organizations over the course of a couple of years, actually. The smallest was 10 stories long, and the longest was this one, which is 17 stories long. And that's the one the publisher sent us to. So
Great.
each time I'd have to reformulate and, and then finally I was like, well, it's just long. Like, not all the stories I've written, but all the ones that I was considering for the collection. Did not expect that to be the outcome.
And the publisher gave you no pushback about that. Publisher just said, hey, let's go with it.
Yep. Yep.
Fantastic.
It's been a really wonderful experience with this publisher. Actually, they're really lovely.
That's great. That's congratulations, because yeah, I know a lot of people who have to fight. So that was great.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. It's the press is out of their university, and they call it a teaching press. So they have like an undergraduate, like majors in book production, editing, design, etc. So the cover design, which I'll show off, I will love.
Yes.
The cover design, I had input into it. They asked for a lot of different input, but students produced it. So I was really impressed by how many people that meant were involved in it, because a lot of times you go with an indie press and you deal with the shortage of staff, because that's the way the publishing industry is right now. Even in the mass publishers, you might get no real staff support. So I felt really fortunate. A lot of people involved.
That's great. A teaching press is perfect because everything is brought to bear, for not just for your sake and the book's sake, but for the students.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us any preview about the novel?
Sure. I wish I had printed out. The novel is called Without You Here. I've been writing it and rewriting it for a really, really, really long time. I've written it. This is probably maybe the fifth, like, entirely different iteration of the book.
Wow.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a peculiar plot shape. So it's about an aunt and a niece who are really close to each other. They're both kind of the outliers in the family, kind of ethereal, kind of unpredictable, with a zest for life, but then they crash, and crash and burn on the regular. So when the aunt commits suicide, when the niece is about 8 years old, there is not just this longstanding grief of the niece having lost someone who is like her second self, but there's a sense in the family that she'll repeat the pattern. So she grows up with this extra burden on her grief. It sets her up for a dangerous marriage. And then in the end, the question really is, what legacy is stronger? Is it the legacy of the tragedy, or the legacy of the love that she left behind in the end? So that's
I'm really impressed that you were just able to focus right to the heart of that. That sounds like somebody who's written a good synopsis to me.
It's the worst part, honestly, of the whole.
It's so hard.
You have to do this really long book, and then they're like, okay, good, that was enough. It took you 10 years, fine. Now write it in 2 cents.
That's right.
Really...
And and you need to do that, and it just about makes you want to pull your ears off. I know, but you just did it. I mean, you've been successful at that, because you set it up and you brought us right to the heart of the matter.
Well, I would recommend a craft book that I read along the way. Was called Meander, Spiral, Explode by Jane Allison. And it talks about plot shapes that are different from the typical, like, inciting incident, blah, 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 whatever. And it talks about other sort of natural shapes that kind of occur, like something might spiral like a leaf, or meander like a river, or explode like so many things that float. And then she went through and kind of showed a bunch of different books that follow these different patterns. And mine is definitely a spiral. We go back, we keep kind of going back in time to get back to the tragedy that keeps pressure on the present Mark story. So, but the fun thing is Jane Allison lives like 2 blocks away from me.
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna blurb them out. So it's really exciting.
All right. Well done. Well done, you.
Yeah, I was super excited because I was like, oh, this is a real long shot.
Is that the spiral form something that you knew about from the beginning, or is it something that you created midway through the writing of this book? Or
what I would say about like what reading the craft book kind of corroborated
okay.
and that the book wanted to take, and made me feel like I could take the risk because it's pretty unusual. I mean, it isn't like I don't think it's fully experimental. I think it would be a lot easier if it was somehow, like, because I could just throw everything out the window. So it's kind of like the balance between some traditional expectation and this less traditional plot shape. And it took me a long time to kind of trust that I had discovered it and that it would work. And that actually my younger child made a spreadsheet of all of the little notes I'd made on every chapter. And
No
my
kidding.
older went through and she created this whole like example of how it could work. In like splicing everything together. It wasn't in the end what I ended up, it was different from what I ended up going
Yeah,
with.
but to see that's fantastic.
It was such a relief because it made it gave me the momentum to keep going because I just kept running aground with the structure on this.
Well, sometimes it is a matter of something really practical, like just needing to see it all at once and not have it scattered on 5,000 Post-its around your office that the dog runs away with. You know, that stuff matters. All right, I have a final question for you. And then we'll toss it to Michael. I know that both of these books are done because one just came out, the other is in process. So what are you working on now? Or is the entirety of your time taken up with the publicizing and the producing of this, both of these?
There's so much, too. Like it's so much more than you think, right? I mean,
It's another job. It's another job.
Unreal. Like I've watched so many other people birth books around me. I did not see all of the strings that were pulling the puppets in the background. It's so much. So I've been writing a lot of like guest columns and like doing author interviews and doing the podcast here or there. I've got a bunch of events coming up. And every day it's like I feel like I go and respond to a bunch of emails just so I can, like get to where I can put the next thing on hold. It's like you don't get to the end of any of them. So what's funny is that right around the holidays, it's all going to just, and then there'll be the holidays. But the new year should be kind of placid for a little while.
Oh,
what I'm to work on is I have another novel that I finished a draft of like during the worst of the pandemic as well. Like I was apparently very productive, even though I felt scattered around, and I've been rewriting. It's got 2 perspectives, and one of them was in first person and one was in third, and I'm switching so they're both in first person, and it's a huge rewrite.
Yep.
I'm about 2/3 of the way through that. Then I have discovered all the other things wrong that it'll take a while after that. But my hope is that somewhere before like maybe summer, I'll be ready to start shopping that one around so that maybe I can keep a little momentum going.
You've got a lot of balls in the air. That is a lot. That's many different jobs. I mean, you're a writer, you're a publicist, you're performer, reader. That's
For some reason, I thought it was a great idea to teach a class this fall. So
oh, good. And now you're a teacher too.
it's really short. I'm teaching for this writing center, and it's like 6 sessions, and next week is the last ones. But it was like, why did I time it so that it's right now when the book's coming out? It was really a little silly. But
have you enjoyed it, the teaching?
I've been teaching with co-teaching with a poet in town, and we're talking about how fiction and poetry talk to each other, which has been really fun. So yeah, it's been great, but it's just also been kind of hilarious. Like, I've got a class tonight. Oh,
I know what it's like. I mean, to me, I could keep talking and we have time, but Michael, what do you think?
Well, I think I want to hear a lot about how fiction and poetry talk to each other
There you
because,
go.
quite honestly, as a poet, I could stand to learn a lot more about that. But I may just have to take your class at some point, Jody.
well, I'll tell you, Michael, maybe you and I can teach one, because what it grew out of a conversation I had with this poet in
Yeah.
town. She was relatively new to town, and we were getting to know each other. I'm like, oh, maybe we could teach a class together. And like, what would we say? So, so we kind of just brainstormed and figured that we would do it. So we've been kind of counterpointing. Like the first class was like a really poetic flash piece of fiction with some like prose poem. Like, where you're looking at where the forms are kind of most alike, and then kind of going out from there. So it's been pretty fun.
So we are accustomed to playing with genre and, writing across genre. And, I'll say this, Jody, I think your turns of phrase, Pam already pointed this out, but they are so lyrical and so poetic and absolutely just thrilling the way they leap off the page and lodge into your cerebellum. And I wonder, selfishly as a poet, do you think a lot of that comes from reading as broadly as I know you do?
That's a good. I mean, I definitely. I'm gonna answer in a long roundabout way, but
Yeah, that's great.
to that poem a day, and I try to like. There are days I don't get to, especially lately. I don't get to most of the things I do most days, but I try to read at least one a day. And sometimes they just knock me over, and I love when that happens. And I do read widely, and part of the reason I started reading poetry was because when I was in, like writing groups around town, every now and then there'd be a poet who was searching for somewhere and like sharing their poetry, and someone in the group would always say, well, I don't read a lot of poetry, so I don't know what to say. And and my feeling was, okay, well then I should read some more poetry, so that if I'm in at the table with someone who's writing poetry, that I at least have something to draw from to be able to respond. And as a teacher, I teach a lot of different disciplines. I mean, like everyone, like I don't teach poetry, but poets take my classes and they will create poetry while others are creating other things. So I want to be able to speak to it all. So and I think some of the my love of language comes from my love of Southern literature. I have many friends who are just like, the way they speak is just so amazing. And I have one particular friend that I wish I just had a tape recorder when he was talking, but I think he's from Arkansas originally, and he will pull an analogy out of nowhere that is so absurd and perfect that it's just like, it'll stop me in my tracks. And that's the kind of thing that I love. So arresting language, whether it's poetry that, makes me feel this certain mystical way, or if it's, just an analogy that slaps me in the head, I love it all.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great answer, and so perfectly you. And as you were answering, I was thinking about the generosity of your answer and your perspective, and how much of that generosity towards your characters and that empathy that Pam was talking about before runs through the stories of this book. And I'm sure somewhere there's a writer who could create and populate worlds with characters that they don't give a damn about, but I don't want to read that book. And it's so obvious in your book and in your stories. And that's such a powerful thing for a writer to be able to do. Well,
I was
sorry.
just going to say really briefly that one of the things that had put me off some short stories was characters who seem so world weary they don't care about themselves or each other or anything. And there's a certain quality to some New Yorker stories, I will say, that just leaves me cold. And I think, why did I bother to read this? And that is not at all what your collection is like, Jody. I would say it's the antithesis of that. And that's why I liked it so much, because none of these people have stopped caring. And that's,
I always find it hard when I'm reading a story where the characters don't care about anything. I don't know where the stakes are. I don't know how to care about the story. Like there might be something really cool happening formalistically. There might be some beautiful language, but if I have no traction on the character, I don't know how to evaluate what I'm seeing, and I lose interest. So,
but we decided as a people a while back that was a hip and cool story, like where people are just so like they can't care about anything. And I don't, that leaves me cold.
Yeah. It kind of comes in and out of favor, I think, too.
Yeah.
I just want to thank Jody, and I put this in the chopped. I'm one of Jody's students, have been over the years. And when I was listening to the first two stories, the one sitting in the chair of a dead man's house across the street, and the second one carrying an M&M doll, life-size M&M doll, and then trying to stow it in the trash of the parking garage, was so similar to the classes I've taken from her, which involve getting four disparate words and spending 20 minutes putting them together. And as I listened to these stories, I thought, this is that class. This is just taking things that you would not think go together, and somehow they do beautifully.
Thanks, Susan.
Absolutely. And that's a great prompt too.
Prompt, right.
Yeah, so Chopped, where I mimic the cooking show, and where they come up with 4 different ingredients that the chefs have to turn into something. So we do it with 4 different prompts. And
That's brilliant.
That is.
And like there are categories for the prompts, so they don't interfere with each other. And you can, and I have the students come up with them, and then we pull something out of an envelope at the beginning of every class. It's great fun.
I am so stealing that. I am taking that and running with it.
Very
Thank you.
Be sure to, if you want tips on how to name the categories, I came up with a pretty good.
I'm going to make a note about that right now. I don't want to forget.
Yeah, I'm teaching a free writing workshop on Sunday morning, and I'm going to be introducing them to the Hobbs Hesler method, which is, yeah.
It's great fun. Like and I have had students who respond every time in a poem. I've had students respond every time with personal memoir, which blow me away. I'm like, how do you take these 4 things that we just came up with here and make these amazing, like, it's great fun to see.
Oh man.
Thanks for mentioning that.
And I'm wondering, have you written an essay about that yet? Not that I'm giving you homework.
Yeah, I haven't. It would be a good one to do. It kind of also addresses a lot of the frustrations I have in sort of the way workshops tend to work, where I feel like we approach something as a broken thing that we want to kind of throw eggs at sometimes. And when we sit down together and we write something at the same time, and it's this sort of flash surprise that everyone comes up with something so different and wonderful, what we open with is awe, that we started with nothing and come up with these very different things. And I feel like it's really hard for that to be where we begin every time we workshop a piece, but that's really what it should be. And it's really helping the writers see the kind of the hot spots they've created, and like help them go toward them, rather than like cauterize things and spend time talking about what's wrong with it. It feels more productive to just really get excited.
That's a wonderful point. That I'm fully behind that. And I think that creates good energy in the room, good energy between writers, for individuals. And I think it's just as important for us each to know what we do well as what we, need work with, because we play to our strengths, right?
Absolutely. And always there's something in a batch of these responses, there's a variety of things people have done particularly well. So it's just fodder for how you talk about craft. You know, oh, that person, there's where you've really taken dialogue and run with, and you know,
Exactly.
like so you can really teach it as a craft lesson without having to tear something apart. I feel like I've just been in a lot of inefficiently run workshops where we just spend a lot of times going over the same territory instead of using it as an object lesson. Like, how can we make this, you know, like, okay, maybe that's not working in my story. Can you show me somewhere it's working? Can we talk more about where it's something is working, either in my work or someone else's or some famous writer? Show me how it works. I want to do it, you know. So rather than picking on what's not working. So
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Unequivocal proof of Jody Hobbs Hesler's brilliance, not just as a writer, but also as a teacher. And you were all privileged to see it here. And Jody, I am just going to say, I am so incredibly happy to have been even just a small part of this tonight. I am so incredibly happy, Pam, that you were here.
I
I'm
am
so
happy too.
Yeah, I'm so incredibly happy that your mom was here to see this. She
Yes.
already knew you were brilliant, but now she can show this to other people and say, look,
Look.
you can see it for yourself. So thank
Well,
you
let
all.
me thank you, Michael, for help for arranging this, and Julia, and you know, you guys are doing these wonderful presentations, and we all appreciate it so much.
It is honestly our pleasure. I love being able to help our brilliant alums like Jody get their work out there and get noticed. And you know, selfishly, I really enjoy being able to sit and listen to brilliant people read. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming. I hope that you'll stay connected with Cambridge Common Writers and check out our other brilliant Leslie alums who'll be reading in the not too distant future. So, Jody, congratulations again on this book. We'll do this again in a year for the novel. You know, we've got some time to plan, but yeah, absolutely.
application date for the novel, by the way, was going to be Election Day.
Ooh.
Yeah, so it's now September 10th. So
Good.
Okay, well, so we'll do it in a little under a year. And again, get those pre-orders in. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.